Hi, and welcome to the latest Social Work Action Network podcast. My name is Michael Lavalette, one of the founder members of SWAN, and today I'm hosting a podcast which is going to look at some of the questions around eugenics and COVID and some of the worrying trends in government policy in response to the disease and its outbreak. I'm real pleased that with me today I've got three people who are going to bring a wide range of experiences to the debate and the question. First of all, we've got Jaynie Mitchell. Jaynie is the mum of a disabled child and is very active in Scotland in the disability movement and the carers movement. She's involved as a facilitator in the Partners and Policy Makers network. We also have Rory Anderson, who is a frontline practitioner in the Children and Families team in the Glasgow area. And we also have Roddy Slorach, who is an activist in the UCU, the Lecturers in Higher Education Union, and he's a writer on disability, politics and eugenics. Okay, so without further ado, we are really just going to press on here. And the first question that I've got to the panel today is really to kind of understand what eugenics is. There's been quite a lot in the press and in the media about things like herd immunity, or when we've heard about the death figures, there's been an argument about, well, it's not really as bad as the figures boldly state, because a lot of people have underlying health issues, or really they were coming towards the end of their life anyway. And in the background, there is this notion about this as a return to some sort of ideas of eugenics. So maybe over to you, Roddy. What is eugenics as a set of ideas, and where do they come from? How significant are they?
Okay, well, eugenics, it may be just worth starting with the roots of the term, because it comes from a Greek word meaning well-born, and it's the belief that human characteristics are essentially inborn, they're inherited, they're in our genes. And there's two versions of eugenics. One is we're a lot more familiar with. The first is positive eugenics. That's the idea really that breeding programs could produce superior people, that you select clever people and you breed them, you encourage them to breed, then we're going to produce a superior race of people. The version we're most familiar with, however, is negative eugenics, and that's the idea that poor people or BME communities, gays, lesbians, women, pensioners, or disabled people, depending on who the target is, are essentially inferior, that their lives are less valuable than other people or disposable. Now, in the late 1920s and 1930s, that led to mass sterilization programs in the United States and in the Scandinavian countries. And most famously and notoriously, in the case of Nazi Germany, mass sterilization programs, which then led to the mass murder of people officially designated as worthless eaters. Now, the thing is that until the Nazi crimes became well known, eugenics was widely seen as a progressive kind of a project by liberals. Founder of the welfare state, William Beveridge, was a supporter, for example, the Manchester Guardian, right through to surprising people like socialists such as even Leon Trotsky, for example. But the thing to emphasize here is that where eugenic ideas were actually put into practice, women, people with learning difficulties, and other disabled people were the main victims of it. Where you see eugenics coming back today, it's absolutely unequivocally been associated with the far right. And it's in particular been associated with the idea that there is only so much cake to go around, there has to be national sacrifices, and therefore services need to be prioritised, and pensioners and other people, some of the disgusting statements that have been attributed to various right-wing individuals have essentially said that, you know, we can cull, as one commentator put it, pensioners or disabled people or others who really shouldn't be eligible for services. The problem is this is not a completely marginal argument. It is entrenched in the Coronavirus Act, and it was the original intention of a draft of the latest guidelines for the National Health Service because of the COVID-19 crisis by the National Institute of Clinical Excellence. So it's important to recognise these are not marginal ideas in the sense that they were considered for a very long time. They've come back to prominence at another time of capitalist crisis, the same time as they were popular before in the 1930s during the Great Depression. They've become popular again because we're now back in the biggest crisis since the Great Depression. I don't think it's an accident that that's the case.
Okay, thanks, Roddy. So really powerful set of ideas that have come back. So maybe just go around each of you and just maybe get you to think about, you know, how that has shaped government and responses to the crisis at the present time. So again, I don't know if anybody wants to come in here. Jaynie, have you got anything that you wanted to add here about how these ideas have shaped government responses under COVID-19?
Families and the individuals that I know have always known that the eugenics agenda is bubbling under the surface all the time, that it's at times of crisis that it really comes to the fore. And for them, it's that real feeling of that, are their children worth it? Not only are they concerned about catching COVID-19, they're then concerned about, well, if we have to go into hospital, will someone else's needs be seen to be more important than ours or our children's? And that's terrifying. It's probably stopping people going to the hospital because they're really frightened about what might happen. We know that some people, disabled people particularly, will not attend hospital because they're concerned about what might happen, so they would rather die at home. And that's completely unacceptable in this day and age. Shocking.
Absolutely. Rory, what about frontline teams? How's this impacting on frontline social work teams?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because, I mean, we're in a period where there's traditional work in terms of one-to-one work, looking at long-term, looking at medium-term, and trying to figure out plans going forward. It's kind of been halted, essentially, because we're so engrossed in how do we manage this period of crisis. So we're not looking at the plans, and it's very difficult to come out of that type of work, that mindset of working with. When I work with young disabled children, think about transitioning into adult life or going to college, you're thinking 3, 4, 5 years down the line. And a lot of this kind of legislation and a lot of the policies, and Jaynie's right about the mindset around fear about what happens to us and families going, well, we don't want to do this, is that they become more constrained, and a lot of the work that's went on to kind of focus on independent living and focus on brighter futures is actually going to come rolling back because of fear, because of the understanding that, well, people don't want us, you know, and as much as that, some of that might be perception, there's always there's a kernel of truth within that at the same time. So I think for social workers, it's going to be very difficult during this period to actually do a lot of that relational based practice, to actually focus on what are the outcomes and what does the child or what does the person want, because what they want is not what the society wants at the moment.
Jaynie, a couple of weeks ago in the papers there was a story about disabled children being given DNRs, so do not resuscitate forms to complete. Have you come across any evidence of that in Scotland, or do you know of parents who are worried about those things?
I think, as Rory says, there's the reality and there's the perception. So over the last few days, I've sent stuff out to all my networks to try and get some information if any of this stuff is happening in Scotland. I think our conclusion is lots of families who have children who are medically fragile, that conversation's already been had, you know, not around the coronavirus, around just life in general, you know, at what stage do we stop intervention? I think in Scotland, it appears to be different from the networks I'm involved with in England. So I know of no one that has, no parent of a child, certainly, that's been contacted over a DNR. I have had some contact with some disabled adults who have said that their provider organisation has been in touch with them to ask their wishes, but it seems much more in Scotland around, we want to make sure that your wishes are fulfilled should anything happen, as opposed to, we don't think you're worthy and therefore you're not going to get a ventilator. So the conversations seem to be quite different in Scotland from what they are in England. I can't talk for Ireland or Wales because I don't have the networks down there, but families are still really worried and individuals are really worried because a lot of the stuff in the press is perceived as being UK-wide, whereas the Scottish Government have clearly come out and said you know, we won't be making choices like that. Every life is worth living. So the perception is very different from maybe the reality in Scotland, but that's because we still live in a society that excludes people all the time. So this is just another way of that happening, I suppose. So people are used to it. So there's a kind of expectation there.
Yeah. And it's important, I think, to emphasise that there are sometimes differences between Scotland and the rest of the UK, because if nothing else, it does emphasise that this is about political choice. It's nothing inevitable about any of these policies or any of these directions. Roddy, can I maybe ask you, at the start of the COVID outbreak in the UK, there was lots of talk about herd immunity. And I think that was shaped by those sort of eugenicist ideas that this would just run through the country and we would all get it. But they've not really, they've dropped that language. Why do you think they've dropped that language in that way?
I think because, well, first of all, I think that eugenics is still widely seen as completely and utterly unacceptable, quite bloody rightly. But the point of the matter is that it became clear that what was being seen here was a really cold utilitarianism. You know, you might remember Boris Johnson's words when he first talked about, you know, the virus, that basically saying that people needed to be prepared for people to die. In fact, the New York Times greeted the first budget on the 11th of March in the wake of the virus as saying the UK shields its economy from the virus, not yet its people, which I think was very apt in terms of what actually happened when Johnson said, you know, I must level with you, many more families are going to lose loved ones before their time. That was predicated on the understanding that there was going to be no major change to the setup of this country in relation to the setup of the National Health Service, with the fact that austerity had to govern the needs of the National Health Service and the setup of the National Health Service, its governance in relation to competition, National Health Service trusts and all the rest of it. So in other words, we were being prepared, and you know, this is still here really, the assumption that essentially that the way our society is organised cannot be questioned, and that therefore people have to die because we don't have the resources in place to be able to cope with it. So herd immunity was essentially a programme that was put in place through a mistaken and highly selective reading of the science, and second, a view that essentially neoliberalism comes first and profits come first, and that people's lives are secondary to that. And I think that's still very much the case.
Yeah. Okay. Jaynie, when we moved away from that sort of brutal herd immunity as the first phase of government policy, we moved into quarantine. Thinking about the people that you work with and represent in your networks, what have been the particular problems of lockdown and quarantine for people with disabilities?
I think for lots of people, it's been reassessed over the phone and having support taken away. If they're not on a direct payment and in control of their own budget, that there's been kind of, so lots of people have had support taken off them. And that's led to, well, horrific situations for some individuals. I'm particularly thinking about disabled adults that live in their own houses. I think for lots of families with children, and ourselves included in that, it's been really interesting because lots of us live a life that is not fairly typical anyway. So for lots of us, it's kind of been okay. You know, we still have support coming in. Ross still gets out and about in the car because that's really important to him. But there's not been huge differences for lots of families, which I think is a shocking reflection on the society that we live in, actually, that people don't really feel more excluded under lockdown. Some of the disabled adults that have been in touch in the last few days when I put the kind of message out have been saying they've felt more equal than they have in the past, because other people can't see their loved ones at the drop of a hat or go out shopping, or, you know, so they feel as though it's maybe been a wake-up call for society. So it's been quite interesting that the different experiences if you have a family member that's significantly disabled to your typical families and how much or not this has affected people. I think there's lots of concerns that families who have shielded, there's huge concerns about coming out this and the other side. The authorities will then turn around and say, well, you managed for 12 weeks without support, so we're cutting your budget. So that a real mixture of experiences from people, but bizarrely some positives in among it all.
Can I jump in there, Michael?
Yeah, I was just going to come to you, Rory, so go ahead.
Because it's very interesting you say that, Jane, because I work in a generic team, right? So I work with various children and young people, and it was actually a very, very similar conversation I had with a care experienced now adult, but who helps us out in terms of what we do with younger care experienced kids. And he was saying, he was like, nothing's changed for me. Like, I'm still stuck in the house. I'm still isolated. You know, things aren't changing for me. And I think what you raised there is one of the biggest problems, that this society does not work for everyone. It's set up like that. People are not able to go about their lives the same way as what happens in society for a large amount of people, not just disabled people, not just care experienced people, but a whole swathe of people who are extremely isolated. Think about the mental health crisis that's been going on in Britain for the last while as well. You know, we're talking about a breakdown of society, and sometimes it does take a crisis for a lot of people to actually come out of their shell and actually think something needs to change. And I think that's what we've seen with Clap for the Carers and Clap for the NHS staff on Thursday evenings, is this beginning of actually a response of anger towards society in a way. Because, you know, when was it that a shop worker was seen as a key person in society? Very little. It's never been in my lifetime anyway when we've had the general view of that. And I think what you're saying about budgets is so true, because it's very hard at the moment for me to get some of that through. And I think what you're going to start to see is folk actually being like, well, you were able to do it for this amount of time, why can't you do it? Because part of it is about increasing capacity to manage these situations, but not unrealistically. This is not a choice in this situation, it's complete restriction.
We're trying to keep our loved ones alive, that's why we're doing it, right? And that's different from typical times when we're trying to get them a good life. This is about preserving, so we're pulling out all the stops, you know, and I'm not working, so that's made that possible for me. But had I had to work, I can't begin to imagine would have worked for our son. It doesn't even bear thinking about. So as long as, for me, it's about as long as we don't go back to business as usual, and we really take time to learn lessons from this about how we have been failing so many people for so long.
So that's a great point, really, to bring us just to our final question, really. So, you know, thinking back on the discussion that we've had, what do you think we need to put in place then for local authorities, for the devolved powers in Scotland, for national UK government? What sort of demands should we be making on them, with a focus on disabled people's rights coming out, so that there's no return to what was like before, but that there's a better life and a better shaped future for us? So, Rory.
I think there's a couple of immediate things that can happen, because I think we have to think it in two terms. I think there's the ideological thing in terms of the eugenics and the herd immunity and all that stuff, is that we can't reduce the social model of working with people back to being a medicalised model where it is very much black and white, when there's a whole lots of grey. So we have to continually fight for a practice that is humane and really thinks about the capacities of people, the strengths of people, and what they can do and what they can build on, because there is a future for people. I think the second area is self-directed support, self-personalisation, legislation around money and budgets and things, I still feel is very provider-led, particularly within children, because there's only a certain amount of organisations who will do children, because it's a whole different liability insurance, it's a whole different legislation, a whole lot of pressures for organisations. So I still think it's quite provider-led, and actually the principles of self-directed support are not enacted properly. It's still very much about, you know, what outcomes. It's very, very limited and restricted to some extent. And I've been in training with Jaynie, well, Jaynie's trained me, I should say. And we've talked about it several times, that you should be able to do this in a way that actually facilitates the interest of the person to develop what is their future, what they want in their future, what makes them happy, what makes us happy as people. We have the capacity to do that ourselves. Some people don't have the capacity, they need support to do that. So let's use it appropriately. So we have to fight for legislation and support to be to be person-centered, which is not still. As much as people want to go on about it, relationship-based practice and person-centered practice, it's not, particularly in disabilities, where it is still very much provider-driven. So your third sector organisations, particularly, will be the benefactors out of this, possibly, when you actually are going to have to look at pulling more people in. Then, in terms of the personal assistance that people use under SDS legislation, you know, what's the situation going to be like that in the future for them? Because I think it's going to be quite restricted again in terms of what people feel comfortable doing after COVID and then during COVID, because people are limited and they're restricted. So we have to fight for if we are going to use informal, if we'll say that, informal support in terms of not using providers, that we have councils and governments do the utmost to train people, to do the utmost to facilitate it and support them in a way that they're not there by themselves.
Okay, and Jaynie, same question. What series of demands do you think we should be making on the various levels of government as we come out of COVID?
I think, as Rory was saying, particularly around self-directed support, that we need to learn lots of lessons around, you know, not thinking about hours of support, and really thinking about what makes most sense for this person. What would it take for them to have a good life? You know, is it about getting soil for a raised bed? Is it about planting vegetables? Is it about buying a bike? Is it about, you know, 101 different things? For me, I'm really passionate that we start changing the education system, which maybe isn't what this is about. I think until we shut segregated schools and start having an inclusive education system, where it's really difficult, because we've still got this two-tier. From the age of 5, we're telling 5-year-olds that there are others that aren't the same, you know. And my experience, Ross was in mainstream school, so he's got a very different life because we fought for mainstream. I think the conversation needs to be about what's our right. You know, we have a right to a budget, we have a right to the right support, as opposed to us being grateful for what's given and us feeling somehow that we get it, somebody else doesn't. You know, because these are all the conversations that still happen, that there's only so much money, I'm really
Oh, went dead there.
did it all go down, or was it just me?
You just quit.
Yeah, we all went dead, all of us.
All right, okay. I always presume it was me.
Yeah, I
I
presumed it was
me.
me.
So learning from this, how creative families and individuals have been.
You might need to start again, Jen. Your response is
So
a bit difficult.
I think you were probably up to, you were just saying about segregated schools,
yeah.
and that Ross was integrating. I think it was just after that. So have you what?
So I think, you know, we need to go right back to basics. If we don't have 5-year-olds going to school together, we're perpetuating this myth that people are different or less worthy or, you know, need something special. They don't. They just need to be included and have pals and be known in their communities as making a contribution. So I think that really helps. That also saves money, because if people are well connected, they don't require as much support. But I won't start on that bandwagon. And one of the things I think is really important to come out of this is I would love to know, well, I wouldn't love to know, but I think it's important that we know. There's lots of conversations about how many people have died in care homes, how many people are dying in group home settings, how many people are dying in hospital settings where they've been maybe sectioned or they can't be supported locally, or they think they can't be supported locally, so we're spending hundreds of thousands of pounds to get them out of area. How many of those people are we losing? We don't know those numbers. I want an end to group settings. That would be, people should be living in their own houses. That's how people are safe. With their own teams, we can have, you know, a limited number of people interacting with people if something like this ever happen again, instead of multiple personal assistants, no control over who comes in and out your house. So I think we need to look after the people that matter. I'd also like, I've got a huge list, but I will shut up, that we start having a different conversation about disabled people, you know, and about a life being worth living. You know, Ross, an employer, he employs people, he puts food on people's tables, he pays people's mortgages because they work with him. So can we start talking about that stuff instead of, you know, we should be grateful for every little support that we get. And I know lots of the families that I work with and the disabled adults that I'm to represent feel the same way, that we need to change the paradigm, change the conversation, and start realising that everyone makes a contribution, whatever that contribution may be, and it needs to be valued.
Jaynie, thanks very much for that.
I'll shut up now.
and Roddy, over to you with the same question. What demand should we be making?
Well, look, to return to what we started with, I think that we all need to oppose the idea that this is now a social Darwinian war of all against all, that it's got to be dog eat dog, that the fittest should be the ones that should survive and everybody else should be dumped or is disposable in some way, should be of less regard, of less value. As Jane was saying, I think it's really important to reject the notion that people who live or work in care homes are somehow less important and should not count in the official figures of the people that die. I mean, to me, that's one of the most naked indictments of the nature of our society, that people's lives are regarded officially as worthless in terms of how they're counted. So I think that the simple statement that every life matters is a very powerful and a very important one. The second thing I would say about this is that we need to recognise that Britain is the worst in terms of the pandemic. In terms of the number of deaths per capita, it's the worst. And as Michael said, this is about political choices. It's not an accident that this has happened. If you look at higher education, where I work, it's in an absolute terrible crisis. And the reason for that is because of the tuition fees regime and the marketisation that's been brought into higher education that's meant that we now have a situation where, as the Times said, if the government doesn't give us the money we need, then at least 30 universities, mainly the post-92 universities, are going to go to the wall. That's a minimum. And they'll be allowed to go to the wall. And the big, richer universities, like the one I work at, will be expected to be able to grab students from other universities in this sort of Darwinian war of all against all, as I'm saying. So I think it's important to recognise that Britain is the worst in many respects, and for many reasons to do with the political choices that have been made and the nature of a society that we are now living in, that has created the horrible, horrible, terrible circumstances in which we actually live. So the other side of that is that what we've seen in response to the crisis has been the rise of these local mutual aid groups, the action groups and so on, that really stress the principles of universality, of cooperation, of watching out for the folk that can't look after themselves as readily and as easily as other people. And I think that these are the kind of groups that start to promote the notion of a more caring, as Jeremy Corbyn used to say, a kinder, gentler society where people genuinely care for each other. But we need power to do that. And to me, that means linking up the trade unions, the labour movement with these local action groups, empowering local communities and beginning to get back to the whole question. I mean, the thing about choice is really important, isn't it? what's a genuine choice? Is it a genuine choice to choose between eating or heating? This is a choice that pensioners face in winter. It's not a choice for people to have to be able to decide that they can't get out of the house for fear of death and then not be able to get the shopping that we know. I mean, we had a bloke die of starvation in Britain very recently. So this is fear is genuinely stalking our streets. And therefore, I think that what we're all about is what we've always been about as activists, is try and spread hope in place of fear. And fear is a very, very real element in all of our lives at the moment. So therefore, I think that it's absolutely not about returning to the past. This is the possibility now, I think, because of the terrible nature of a crisis. So the horrible nature of society, to me, has been exposed to many, many, many more people as a consequence of what's going on, as others have said. So I think that we've got a big opportunity now to start talking about what we mean by, nothing about us without us in terms of disabled people. That's a slogan which for me means something to millions of working class people. We're not being listened to. We need to start to fight to articulate demands that link up all of us and say that, we shouldn't be choosing between services for pensioners or trade unionists or key workers or anything else. Every life matters, as I said, and therefore I think we need to start getting back to the notion of universality, that we should be providing services on the basis of need, not on the basis of a balance sheet and not on the basis of profits come first, because that way lies a nightmare and lies a situation where we're going to be made to pay for the cost of a crisis that was not of our making, but was absolutely and utterly tied up with the nature of this terrible society that badly needs replacing with a different and a better one. So I think that, the hope that is there in terms of the things that people have been doing on the ground, I hope to see that grow and to be nourished and cherished. And I think that it's a job of all of us to try and link these things up.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks very much to Rory, to Roddy, and to Jaynie. If you've enjoyed listening to the podcast, please do like it and share it on all your various social media. And please make sure that you visit the Swan website and Facebook page in the near future, where we'll be having another in our series of podcasts. Thanks very much for watching.